All right. So good afternoon, SOS Class 21 Echo. I'm Captain Joe Smiley. I'm a B-19 flight commander, the best flight at SOS in the Bulls Squadron. So I will be your moderator for today's event. Welcome to the next event in our guest speaker series, Innovation and Leadership. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Steve Justice. A native of Nashville, Tennessee, he is a 1978 graduate of the Georgia Institute of Technology with a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering. Having had an interest in flying machines from a young age, Steve transitioned that interest to a dream career working for Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works. He was part of the highly innovative team that developed the F-117A, the YF-22A, JASSM, and a myriad of other programs he can't discuss. His experience bridges from operations analysis based requirements derivation and configuration design through system flight test. This engineering breadth is complemented by leadership roles as configuration lead, chief engineer, program manager, proposal capture team lead, advanced design group manager, campaign director, and advanced programs portfolio director. In 2017, after 4 decades of incredible design challenges, he retired from Skunk Works. He most recently assumed the role of Vice President of Engineering at Virgin Galactic, where he is responsible for the engineering personnel, tools and processes, and technical integrity of their solutions as they work towards Richard Branson's vision for space tourism. We invite you to use the chat function to ask questions, which we will address in the discussion portion of this event. We encourage academic freedom as well. Mr. Justice, the floor is yours if you'd like to offer any opening remarks.
Yes, first of all, thank you. I forget how many of these I've done now, and every one is absolutely fascinating in the questions that come in. But also, I will say the energy that comes from it as I field the questions. You can tell where they come from, and so it's a real honor to be here. In terms of framing this, some of my most recent experiences with Virgin Galactic, and I've only been there about 4 months now, but I will say there's 3 things that stick out in my mind from a leadership standpoint. One is this context of stand in the future.
Oh, no, that's too much.
And I talked about that some in the video that you had available to you, but this ability to project yourself out into the future, assume different futures where things go right, things go wrong, unexpected things come up. There's a series of questions that you end up asking yourself, and then bring those back into the present and ask yourself those questions now. The boss has always taught me to do that, and it's particularly when things don't go as planned. Asking yourself those questions in the present allows you to do a better job of handling, we'll say, the known knowns, the known unknowns, the unknown knowns, but it also prepares you for the unknown unknowns. The other thing that is really important is to respond and not react. The ability to stop, think, breathe, drop your shoulders is really important from a leadership role, because you get one chance typically in order to influence something, particularly in a stressful situation. And the last I'll say is resilience. As things don't go the way you planned, the question is, how do you respond to that? So with that, to maximize the time for questions, the floor is open.
Thank you, Mr. Justice. SOS Class 21 Echo, we invite you to the discussion portion of this event. Please continue to ask your questions through the chat function, and we'll get to as many as we can. You can also ask your questions live if you prefer. So, sir, one question I have for you is, during your time at Skunk Works, what was the most memorable experience that you're allowed to talk about for the group, sir?
There's a couple, but I'll highlight one that was really important to me, and that was the development of the YF-22. This was a real challenge. I mean, there was the technology challenge that existed out there of, super crews and stealth and sensors and all those kinds of things. That was hard. But I will say that the leadership challenge was in the blending of three different cultures. You had Boeing, General Dynamics, and Lockheed. On top of that, the cultures brought with them different approaches to technology, different approaches to problem solving, as well as, I'll say, different vocabularies. People heard things different ways. And so there was very little time to assimilate all of those.
Sorry for the technical difficulties there. We'll pick it back up, sir, if you don't mind. So the question was, what was your most unique or memorable experience at Skunk Works that you're able to talk about, sir?
Great, thank you. Is my audio working okay now?
Yes, sir. You are loud and clear.
Perfect. Okay, the most memorable one to me that I can talk about is the development of the YF-22. It had a series of technical challenges, Super Cruise, stealth, sensor integration, those kinds of things. But I will say the most difficult challenge was, from a leadership standpoint, was quite honestly the blending of the cultures of Boeing, General Dynamics, and Lockheed. You had three very different ways of communicating, of solving problems, and decision making. And so the team had to form very quickly, gel very quickly, and overcome, I will say, those, or integrate those three cultures. It wasn't overcoming them because nobody was going to change anything, but integrating those three cultures into a solution space. It resulted, and you can read about this online, there's a great set of articles on it, that resulted in the great configuration search. You saw allies form in different areas. And quite honestly, it resulted in a solution that was better than any of the three individual efforts. But I will say it was one of the most complex leadership challenges I've ever experienced. And I watched it I wasn't a leader at that time. I was actually working configuration development, but I was reporting to leaders that were immersed in the challenge of bringing these three teams together. And I saw exactly how complex it was. I experienced firsthand the complexity of the decision making among the three cultures, as well as the company agendas. So that was a tough one. I mean, there's been technological challenges that have had leadership challenges associated with them, but this effect of the multiple cultures in the team environment was very complex and, quite honestly, very rewarding, because, as I said, the answer that we came up with at the end was better than any of the three individual efforts.
All right. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Awesome answer. Thank you. So I have another question here, sir, from Nate. What barriers did you face bringing innovative ideas to the defense acquisition system, and how did you overcome them? So sort of related to that question, sir.
Sure. Nick, thank you for that one. Quite honestly, it was the variability in risk acceptance. There were some portions, some offices you would deal with that were very tolerant of risk, that were very forward leaning, and you would get used to working in that environment, and then suddenly you would go to some offices that were very risk averse. And so it required a completely different style change, a different set of, I'll say, a different thought process, a different execution process to adapt to that fundamental change in risk acceptance. So I'll say risk acceptance is one thing, whether you're dealing with high risk acceptance or very low risk acceptance. But I will say the variable nature of it meant that you had to be very adaptable in dealing with that.
All right. Thank you, sir. I have another question here, sir, from Margaret Haley. Sir, do you have any insight or perspective on the recent unidentified aerial phenomena that have been in the news recently?
Yeah, perspectives on it. Yeah, I got a lot of perspectives on it, but I want to frame it this way. When so I retired from the Skunk Works, and Tom DeLonge said, "Hey, would you be interested in working uh, essentially on engineering the space-time metric?" You can think of it as warp drive. It was like, that is a hard thing to go do. I immerse myself in the difficult challenges. That was what my whole career was about, was taking on the very low probability of win, low probability of success, and firefighting sort of challenges. The the thing about the UAPs or UFOs, whatever you want to call them, that I only had kind of tertiary interest in that. I've had friends that have seen them, friends that quite honestly I would trust my life with, that have seen these things. I was a little bit I was very dismissive of them until I was sitting around the office one night. One of my unpaid opportunities at the Skunk Works was I was the historian for the organization. And so I had a lot of files, including the files of Kelly Johnson and Ben Rich. And so after hours, I would sit around and go through these things. And I was digging through them one night. I'd pull out a stack of papers and just read them. And there was a memo from, it was the late 1950s, where Kelly Johnson and several of his flight test team saw a UFO, and they documented. Kelly was at his ranch. The other members were actually up in a constellation, and they saw the same thing at the same time from two different vantage points. And I thought to myself, these people are not, they're smart people, and they know what swamp gas is and airplanes and clouds and all that kind of stuff. And this was disruptive to their thought process. And so my perspective on it was, I'm going to push aside who's behind the wheel, where it came from, all of that stuff, and I'm going to concentrate on the fact that that means this can be done. So how do you do it? What is the technology that enables you to fly without wings or tails, excuse me, or inlets or nozzles or any of those kinds of things? Excuse me one second. So when I started working with Tom, all of that was going on right next to me, because it represented the potential of a database for solving the engineering the space-time metric thing. So inevitably working with Chris Mellon, Lou Elizondo, and the people that were working policy on the Hill, you got exposed to a lot of things. I was in numerous briefings that haven't been talked about, that were very eye-opening for me. And it became clear it's absolutely real. These are physical objects, not apparitions. I mean, some of these pilots have been so close to these things that it's not a reflection off of a canopy or any of that kind of stuff. The fact that they were tracking them with radar, tracking them with infrared sensors, but also Mark I eyeball, Aegis cruisers. I mean, it's clear something is going on. The question is, what is it? And I never heard a definitive explanation of what they were in any of the circles that I was in. But I will tell you, virtually every pilot that I talked to wondered. There was, colorful language that described their initial encounter with this, but what also immediately went through their minds as they would see these things accelerate, and the performance of them was, how about you, me? Let's go. But also, hey, can I fly that thing? And I would have to agree with him. It kind of reminds me of Will Smith in Independence Day. I've got to get me one of these. And so, but my main takeaway from it was this means that kind of acceleration, that kind of performance, we'll call it transmedium, going from space to air to underwater, and even there's where they penetrate the earth and all that kind of stuff. It's mind-blowing. But when you look at the rules of engineering the space-time metric, it allows that. It enables that. There's a set of physics that explains that, and it's considered fringe right now, physics. but it is based in Einstein's theory of general relativity. It doesn't violate that. And so one of these days we're going to figure that out. And we're going to do that, and it's going to be a long journey. Figuring out how you go from physics to enabling technologies that can be embodied in a machine is going to take some time. But I have zero doubt that we're going to get there.
It is.
Thank you, Mr. Justice.
Yep.
Sir, so next we have a live question from
Okay.
Tristan Miller. So Tristan, if you want to unmute, please feel free.
Hey, good afternoon, Mr. Justice. Awesome to have you. Thank you for being here. I just wanted to ask you, so the U.S., we spend a significant amount of money on our defense. We certainly outpace Russia and China when it comes to spending. It seems that we're losing in the realm of standoff weapons, specifically when it comes to hypersonic weapons. I know that we're fighting hard to try to get the AGM-183 Alpha out to try to catch up. But my question for you is, why are we trailing in this space from your experience? And what do we need to be doing to catch up and surpass our adversaries?
Great question, and it actually extends beyond hypersonics into a lot of the acquisition system. And that is, as we think about the consequences of failure in a program, there's a, and this is tied to risk tolerance, there's a strong tendency to where when you start missing schedules and budgets, that we stop, we cancel programs. The number of times that hypersonic programs have been canceled or terminated because of stumbles is countless. I mean, the running joke that I always heard for the span of my career was hypersonics is 10 years away and always will be, because we just don't follow through. And what we have in our adversaries is they're willing to get it about right and fail and fail and fail and fail and just keep trying. And it's you learn from failing. And so they embody the lessons learned from that failure. They go fix it and they try again. Whereas we'll go, you know what, we've had 2 or 3 things that didn't work out the way we planned. You know, the tolerance of, you know, Congress starts getting upset. It looks bad in the public that you've had these failures, and people turn their eyes. I mean, it's how many, I mean, I remember one thing that flared up, and it's not a technological thing, but it flared up and caused a huge churn inside the Pentagon, was the $1,000 Allen wrench, the one-time use $1,000 Allen wrench. And it was an Allen wrench that was used to torque a very specific wing attach bolt, and it was designed to fail in the field where you knew you had reached the proper torque on the bolt. And as opposed to carrying expensive wrenches in the field and stuff, it made more sense, it made more cost sense to have this $1,000 Allen wrench. Or you had the I think it was a $1,000 toilet seat that went in the Lockheed P3. And it actually, you know, the news showed it as the toilet seat ring. Well, it wasn't. It was the giant molding that made up the lavatory, and it actually cost way more than that. But Lockheed only charged $1,000 or something for it. But you know, I mean, it's that kind of scrutiny that brings down a, well, maybe we ought to cut and run on this because we just can't stand it. So you have to ask yourself, you know, how much fortitude do you have to go defend against the onslaught of perceptions that are oftentimes, it's not that they're misinformed, it's just that all the facts don't exist. And so, and you can never share all the facts with the people that scrutinize things. And so just like everybody's brain, when you have a few individual facts floating in space, your brain will form a story there, and then it will extrapolate, and it seldom is the truth, or at least it's not the full truth. And so you have our adversaries that are willing to make mistakes, that don't get the sort of scrutiny I'll say, that we get here in the U.S. They make decisions very quickly with let's go with what is about right and see if it works. And it's allowed them to get inside of our decision loop. And that's a scary thing. And the question is, what are we going to do about it? And you saw Will Roper instituting this Century Series mindset. Let's get back to what we were doing in the 50s and go get something that's about right, that's a short-term solution, rather than trying to engineer something that's the 20 or 30-year-long solution. The F-117 spec was 69 pages, and it had 3 KPPs for it. And every other shell in that spec could be traded for the 3 KPPs. And so, you know, now you look at the spec for the F-22 or F-35, and there are thousands of pages, and every one of the shells is tracked. There's money to do that. There's time to do that. And the question is, what is important? One of the things we always try to do is write capability-based specs, as opposed to specs that outline, okay, well, this connector is going to be like this, and that box is going to do this, and that kind of thing, to where, you know, it's, I'll boil it down to what's truly important. And so, and then, you know, how do you defend this? And it's tough. I get that we need to be fiscally responsible. And there's, you know, every oppressive rule can be traced to the abuse of a privilege. And so there's those failures that are visible and public and spectacular, that cause us to reevaluate whether we want to go forward with something or not. The F-117, the very first production bird, crashed. The 2 prototypes for it crashed, or the demonstrators, the half blue demonstrators, crashed. That was done in the black. And if that had been in the public eye, you have to ask yourself, what kind of scrutiny would it have gotten? Would the program have proceeded with those kinds of failures? In today's environment, you know, I don't know what the answer would be, but I know it would have been really tough. And yet, every stealth is, I remember stealth used to be a very coveted and kind of blocked off discipline, that it was called special tech, even back in the black world days. And now it's a discipline like aerodynamics or propulsion or any other thing. It's just mainstream and is a natural part of our system design. But it took that program to start that, to create and understand the value that it brought. So, you know, that's a very long-winded answer to your question, but it boils down to risk aversion, the scrutiny that we have because we are an open society and we ask lots of questions, and rightly so. But it has this, I'll say, unintended consequence of causing us to maybe sometimes not stick with it, not follow through, when there was an answer out there and we just didn't follow through on it.
Thanks again, sir. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Tristan, for the question, and thank you, Mr. Justice, for that excellent answer. So we have another live question, sir. So Brett Ross, if you want to come on comms and ask your question.
Hey, sir, Captain Brett Ross here. I suspect that you largely answered this with your previous answer. I was going to ask, what are your keys to a successful prototyping process, and has the DoD hindered their effectiveness? Just kind of building off what you talked about, learning from failing, defining what's really important.
Great question. When it comes to prototypes, you have to ask yourself, number one, what is important? And focus on what is important. And this is that separating want from need. A human needs air, water, a little bit of food, and we'll add shelter into that. Everything else in the strictest, you know, the tightest tooth flea comb you can have, everything else makes life a lot better. But to sustain the human body, that's what's required. And so if you run that kind of flea comb through separating want from need, as we look at prototypes, that's really important. The second one I'm going to say is small teams. There's a propensity to bring in lots of help on things. And my personal experience is small teams are a really critical element in the process. If you go look at the X-55 Advanced Composite Cargo Aircraft, this was a challenge actually by the Secretary of Air Force to create an all-composite transport, to go fly the composites, because we'd done a lot of groundwork with these integrated composite structures, but we hadn't flown them. And so it's $50 million in 24 months. Boeing and Northrop did not bid on it. Lockheed did. So did, I believe, Aurora Flight Sciences and a few others. And the general feeling was that it needed to be a non-traditional house that did this, because there wasn't the freedom of thought. But Lockheed actually won the contract, did it for $50 million and just over 24 months. The thing that was most interesting about it was the process itself. Barth out of Dayton was the program manager, and Secretary of the Air Force Wynn gave him a platinum card to say, do it the way that's necessary. And so Barth only brought in the people that were needed, and held a stiff arm to those that he felt did not contribute to the process. And there was a lot of people knocking saying, hey, you know, I'm supposed to be included in this. And it took a lot of force to say that on the customer side, but I'll say we had to do that on the Lockheed side. So let me frame it properly, on the Lockheed side as well. And I remember Mike Swanson was the program manager for it, and the intensity with which we had to resist the, hey, you know, but I'm supposed to be included in this, or I'm supposed to be included in the decision making, was it had to be very intentional. But that was what was necessary for success. We've become very accustomed to a very inclusive environment, and there's a lot of value that can bring, but it has to be right sized for the process. The other thing that I will say is really critical inside of here is resilience during failure, because it is going to happen. And there was a very collaborative environment between the customer and Lockheed on this. Barth's team and the Lockheed team were very open in what was going on, just the daily stand-ups. There was nothing to hide inside of it. And so the collaborative nature of it was beyond critical, especially in recovering from setbacks. And there were setbacks inside there, and there were some major setbacks. And then the last one I'll say is conviction. People wanting to make this happen on both the contractor as well as the customer side, to where the amount of second guessing that went into what was important, what was happening during the stressful periods, that was I'll say those are the keys that immediately come to mind.
Thank you, Mr. Justice.
Yep. Thank you.
Yes, sir. The next question we have is from Michael Shields. What resources or experiences have been useful for your own leadership development over the course of your career?
Resources. I will say the most valuable resource for me was feedback from people that I did not work for and people that did not like me. Because that meant that they were hearing the rumor mill and were predisposed to listen for the things that they wanted to hear. And so every couple of years, I would go to one of these people and ask them how I was perceived. And because that was your bow wave. You don't control your bow wave out there. When you're a subsonic airplane, the air knows you're coming. It starts moving out of the way long before you get there. And so how you handle things in the here and now with the circle of people that you have creates a bow wave in front of you. And it becomes people's perception of you. Reality doesn't count here. People's perceptions are reality. And so by talking to this group of leaders, I could understand what my bow wave was, and I got to choose whether I did anything about it or not. I've got a couple of notebooks here. I'll even bring them up. I got it actually sitting right here. I was just showing these to somebody the other day. The confidential on it is not a classification thing. It is a because it had personal information about me in it, so don't panic there. But it was leadership assessments, and there was a leadership mirror assessment, and inside of here, here's actually I kept my personal note from those meetings of how I was perceived, and you can see there's lots of pages inside of here of notes where I wrote down the information that I combined with the no kidding feedback I would get from 360s. But that was instrumental in shaping how I managed myself, how I improved myself. Now, there were some perceptions I was never going to change, nor did I care to. But I had to be aware of them. It was, and quite honestly, in the vast majority of those cases, I was never going to change, and generally people's perceptions, you only change that through your own actions. But in this group of people, I was never going to change those perceptions. And so that's a tough one to deal with. And you have to be sensitive about that, because that meant that there were the landmines out there as you built teams, as you made decisions. But I will say, this is also the group of people that I brought into my programs to grade me. They were the hardest graders out there, and if I could pass their scrutiny, it would mean that I could pass any scrutiny out there. And this would include people that were of former Air Force in this particular case. They would come in, I'd bring them in, usually they were direct employees or even sometimes consultants, and have them ask me the super hard questions, because if I could answer them, then I was prepared for when I would come to see you. And so that was the most valuable tool that I had for me. I will say, if anyone's interested in this, the team already has this. I have what's called my operating rules and my expectations of leaders. And I would brief every team that I built on this. When I would stand up a program, I would brief my team on this, how my brain worked, because it's all written down, and then what I expected from them and what they should expect from me. So that was another very powerful tool for me, but it was shaped by a lot of this feedback that I would get, as well as personal experiences. The face plants I'd done off the high dive, in some cases there was not even water in the pool, so they were pretty ugly. As well as successes and failures that I saw on other people's part. That all contributed to this living document that I still maintain to this day. And you're welcome to it. I actually have an update to it that I've done since the version that I sent the SOS team here. So I'll actually send you the update so you have the most recent one. And if anyone will like that, you're welcome. The team here is welcome to distribute it to whoever asks for it.
Thank you, Mr. Justice, and thank you for the valuable insight as well. Another question, sir, from Trevor Muzzy. We have about time for one or two more questions, sir. So we'll go with this one and then see if we can get another one in. How does the U.S. military's R&D process compare to other major national competitors, and how will we continue to maintain a competitive edge?
Yeah, that's closely related to what I was talking about, the question about hypersonics that I think it was Tristan asked. I will say the trick for us in R&D is to not be trapped by, I'll say, mainstream expectations. And you may ask, well, what do you mean by that? And in the video that I prepared for you, I did the ships example, and there where our brain will quickly collapse down to a ship as a thing that floats on water, but then we miss this huge design space that's available to us, and there's opportunity out in that space. It's like as well as the example I gave you in the video. I believe I went through the example of the GPS, what the perceptions from the late 1970s to now. And so as we do this trick of standing in the future and looking about, where do we need to be? What needs to exist out here? I knew when I would be stretching the art of where we needed to go, where we needed to be, because people would either roll their eyes at what I said or they would laugh at me. But when I was tasked with doing systems or creating systems that were going to be 20 or 30 years from now, if I trapped myself in today's technology, then we weren't moving the ball down the field at all. There'll be a time to lock down the tech base for something, but now's not the time to do it. I remember I was working on one platform that was going to be about 20 years out into the future, and I go, what does the cockpit of the future look like? The crew station of the future? And they said, well, it looks like F-35, and it was like, no, it doesn't. But that was a really interesting way, because they saw the big glass displays and finger on glass, and I remember that was in the YF-22 back in the 80s, and was it perfect back then? No, but it had finger on glass. It actually had this application I'm talking about was for something completely different than a fighter, but where they said the F-35 cockpit, but the YF-22 cockpit had a reclining seat in it for high Gs. Maybe it was really advanced in going out and trying things, because it was really reaching out into the future, and they wanted to embrace and try that as much of those technologies out in the YF-22 that they possibly could. And so I remember the thought process that went into that was, as I talked to each of the team members, it was going to be, what is the technology going to be out in the future for people that will be flying this thing? And I can't remember, I forgot to, or I didn't have the time. I remembered to do this, but I didn't have the time to do it for this video. I can't remember if I told this story or not, so I apologize if I did. But I remember talking with one guy that was working the pilot vehicle interface, and he said, Steve, the pilots that are going to fly this operationally aren't born yet. They're going to grow up in a world of computers that you and I can't imagine. They're the games that are going to be on computers, and the way they're going to interface with those games is going to be unlike anything that we can imagine. And the decisions that I make now need to factor that in, and I need to make sure I don't unintentionally inhibit how they're going to interact with the airplane, again, with those decisions that I make today. So how do I do that? And I remember in the 2000s, it was about 2012, 2013, being at Nellis Air Force Base, and here were those pilots that were in the F-22 interacting with it, interfacing with the airplane in a very different way than we had ever imagined, and using the airplane in ways that we had not imagined when we designed it, and it was better than what we envisioned. And so I always kept that in mind of, this is going to be 20 years from now. What's the world going to be like then? And how are people going to use this? How are they going to interact with it? What is its environment going to be? and what are the decisions I need to make today that are not inhibited by the technologies limitations I have today? What do I need to go work? What are the technology elements we need to go develop and mature to realize the capability that we need to have 20 years from now?
Thank you, Mr. Justice, for that answer. So the next question comes from the Bull Squadron, Flight B-21. And I'm going to paraphrase, sir, because it's actually kind of lengthy. But given our heavy reliance on the integration of technologies and parts from other countries, foreign countries, have industry partners such as Lockheed, Boeing, etc., had to change their design processes to combat the security risks imposed by the acquisition process?
Yes.
Good answer, sir. Thank you.
Yes. It is, and that's a tough one, and that's about all I can say. But you have to do that. It just the the standard terms of assurance that are used in multiple domains applies here. So that is a discipline and unto itself, and it's critically important.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So thank you, Mr. Justice, and thank you, SOS Class 21 Echo, for your thoughtful questions. And again, thank you, Mr. Justice, for your candor in responding. Sir, would you like to give any closing remarks?
Yes. Listen, one of the recurring themes that I hear in this question set, as well as in a lot of forums, and that is, how do we build this momentum for innovation and making things happen the way that they used to? And there's a caution that comes into my head, and there's also opportunity. The caution is, the good old days weren't really quite the good old days. There was a lot of good elements in there, and the question is, what are the really important things about what we did back then? There was a lot. Like in the 1950s, I think, as I look back on the prototypes that were built and that kind of thing, maybe we weren't quite as constrained as we needed to be. A little bit of focus may have made better use of the resources that existed. But I appreciate the freedom of thought in there, and I appreciate the embracing of risk, the willingness to try things, the follow through mentality, while doing things in a very streamlined way. So if I had to kind of pick the DNA pieces of it to bring into the future, I would say that's the pieces I would bring forward. But in a little bit, we have an advantage today, an opportunity today that they didn't have, which is the tools that we have allow us to do a much better job of discerning and creating smarter decisions. But there's a caution in that we can become kind of chasing ourselves with analysis and chasing ourselves with too much information. We really flood ourselves with information today, and it often results in a decision-making slowdown because we wait for more and more and more data. I asked one time an Air Force customer, what was something that was unique about how the Skunk Works handled a decision process? And it was like, what's really interesting and unique about what I see with you, and this was in I'll say the early 2000s time frame, so I'm going to frame it then, is you'll do a BOPSAT, a bunch of people sitting around a table, BOPSAT. You'll hash through ideas. You may run off and do a little bit of analysis, but in a couple of days of meetings, you'll set a quadrant and you'll launch. and start working things. And then you'll find out what's good and bad about the decisions that you made. You'll do heading adjustments, and you'll converge on an answer very quickly. And so your trade studies tend to be very focused. The decision making is very, very quick. And that was something that this customer saw as unique inside there. So I'm going to build on that and add a comment that Kelly Johnson made, which was the value of decision making. Because team momentum is everything. When you break momentum, then I will say, time expands, time dilates, cost increases, because the team goes on hold waiting for a decision. And Kelly's philosophy was that a good decision today is better than a great decision 2 weeks from now, because you can very quickly converge and find out how good your decision was. But it also means you got to tolerate the fact that you may be wrong, but knowing that you can make a heading adjustment from it. So that sets up this environment of rapid decision making, build momentum, and having a tolerance for failure. And those are all, that environment is created and driven by leadership, 100%. And so if you want to influence the outcome of something, if you want to streamline a direction, my perspective, this is the world according to Steve Justice. Everything I've said today is the world according to Steve Justice. I don't speak for Lockheed anymore. I don't speak for anybody more. I've given lots of examples that I've had, but it is my perception of what I experience. But that's what I experience, and that's where I believe that there's value when you're looking for how to do things differently. And then you can add other building blocks to that can adapt to the particular need of the problem you have. So I wish you luck. The world and the future that awaits you is absolutely amazing. Know that decisions are going to be in your hands. How you handle them will create a bow wave. You get to choose how you handle that bow wave, and you get to choose what the environment is that your team is going to experience. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. You have no idea how much fun this is. I treasure this opportunity. So thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Justice. And thank you, SOS Class 21 Echo, for your participation and your patience today, as this was the first time that we did a guest speaker session on Teams. Thank you again for everything. A recording of this event will be available on Canvas in the near future. And have a great day. Thanks again, Mr. Justice.
Thank you.
Sir. Yeah, that was great, sir. I tried to vector the questions to kind of be related here and there, especially the prototyping and the design process, because that's the current block for instruction that we're in. They actually have their strategic design presentations tomorrow. So today and yesterday, they've been doing prototyping and testing.
Great. Okay, so give me some feedback. How well was that aligned to, I'll say, perceptions?
I think very well, sir. I mean, we got the alien question out there, right? Because that's always a good one, right? Tom DeLonge's name got mentioned, so that was awesome. And then we got the leadership portion in there as well, sir. And then we got the